All right. So we are now recording. We are live on Facebook, but we're not live on Zoom yet, but we will be in about a minute. Okay. So here we go. Ready?
Sure.
All right. Well, I am really excited. I'm Jim Morgan. I am the president of the Fishers Historical Society. I think I got that title because I missed a meeting. But anyway, so it's like, well, you do it. But I'm really excited today. We've started this Fishers History Chat to try to bring some interesting history tidbits to everybody here in Facebook land and on Zoom and what have you. But tonight, it's not exactly Fisher's history, but it's about what 15 miles down the street, so it still counts. So we have Jennifer Capps, and she is the vice president of curatorship and exhibition at the Benjamin Harrison Presidential Site. And we'll talk more about the presidential site in a minute because that's one of my favorite places. I love it down there. But she is here to talk to us about our kind of our Halloween edition, our October edition on the body snatching that happened to Harrison's father. So, Jennifer, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about you and the Benjamin Harrison presidential site.
Thank you for having us this evening. So I've been here at the Benjamin Harrison Presidential Site for quite some time, about 34 years altogether. So again, VP of Curatorship and Exhibition. So one of my duties is that we have some rotating exhibits that we do in the house, and of course, taking care of all of the collection. And we're very lucky that we have a very large collection, over about 11,000 items altogether in our collection, a lot of which actually belong to the Harrison family. So that can be Benjamin Harrison, and his father, his grandfather, William Henry, going back to Benjamin Harrison V and Benjamin Harrison IV. So that wonderful Harrison family history, obviously their connections to Indiana, Indiana politics. So a little bit of everything in our collection here at the Benjamin Harrison Presidential Site.
It's a beautiful building. It's a beautiful house. I love. My wife and I try to make a pilgrimage down there every Christmas because you guys do it up nicely for that. So that's always a lot of fun. So now it's October. It's Halloween time, and and Fishers of all things was known for. We actually had a I guess you'd call it a ring of grave robbers that were operating out of Fishers. Now, this story didn't connect to that, but it's quite the thing. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about all that stuff? That's crazy.
So, at the time, and we're, for Benjamin Harrison's father, he passed away in May of 1878. So kind of in that time period, you have body snatching. There's a sort of a difference, I'll say, between grave robbing and body snatching. Grave robbing could mean you're taking, the clothes and the jewelry and that sort of thing. I always think of, Ebenezer Scrooge, kind of with that kind of image. But the body snatchers, are the resurrectionists, or resurrection men, as they often call them, were actually getting bodies of recently deceased people that they would sell often, or had an arrangement with different medical schools at the time period. It was very hard for these medical schools to get cadavers at that time period. So this was a business, a practice that kind of came about during that time period, and obviously impacted everyone. Kind of, here it is. This is, of course, before Benjamin Harrison is president, but his grandfather, William Henry Harrison, of course, was a famous politician as well. So, it didn't, you were not protected necessarily. And there are details about the Harrison grave robbery. They actually hired a watchman to sit with the gravesite of his father. Harrison, actually, Benjamin Harrison paid him $30, like $1 a day, for 30 nights that he was supposed to watch this gravesite. So they were taking precautions and doing things because it was a known practice that this was going on at that time period. And so they had sort of done all of those things and still had an incident, unfortunately, with their father's body there. And it was in Ohio, in North Bend, Ohio, at Congress Green Cemetery that is there near North Bend, Ohio as well.
Now I have bits and pieces that that I understand as well that they were so precautious that they had actually poured concrete to try to keep it from happening, and it still happened.
Yeah, they actually had they have different layers of coffin or casket. And speaking of that, I'll just tell you with William Henry Harrison, his grandfather, they were sort of even taking precautions in the 1840s at that time. And William Henry Harrison is, died in Washington, D.C. And with his, they had two layers of a mahogany casket, which in 1870, we have a little account since he died in office. They have $75 for the two layers of mahogany caskets. Then they had a lead coffin, two layers for that as well at $90. And then a walnut coffin, which I assume is actually the inner one. So they had often these multiple layers. The lead for William Henry Harrison's actually would have been like soldered or welded shut to try to prevent for body snatching at that time period too. So you have these different layers. You have some layers for John Scott Harrison as well. They actually put three very large stones on top of his casket in the ground and then poured concrete. Had again someone sitting there waiting for the concrete to dry before they put in the dirt. So they had done all of those things, and still, unfortunately, his body was stolen in the middle of the night a few days.
And John Scott, he was a congressman, wasn't he?
He was a congressman from Ohio. And of course, they, again, North Bend, Ohio, that home there, where Benjamin Harrison is born at what they called Old Point Farm there in North Bend. And William Henry Harrison's home was there. It burnt down in the 1850s. But of course, you have William Henry Harrison's tomb there. If you've been to North Bend, Ohio today, you know that they have a marker for that location. They have William Henry's tomb. The obelisk was added to William Henry's in the 1920s. But there's a little cemetery kind of just across the street from William Henry's tomb. That is the Congress Green Cemetery, and that was family land. Again, actually, Anna Sims Harrison, William Henry's wife. Her father was John Cleves Sims, who is early into the Ohio area, owned a lot of the land in the area. There are other little towns. There's a Cleves, Ohio. There's a Sims, Ohio. So all in that area. So he actually started that cemetery there on that side of the family. And so that is where John Scott Harrison was being buried at that time. Other family members are there as well.
So now John Scott, I don't know if he had siblings or not, but I mean, how many people? I think he and maybe his siblings only are the only people that had a president for a. Well, in fact, he's probably the only one that has a president for a father and a president for a son.
Pretty much, yeah, the Harrisons, William Henry Harrison and Benjamin Harrison, so far are the only grandfather and grandson to both be president. Of course, you have a couple of fathers and sons,
Mhm.
but they are so far the only grandfather and grandson to have a president in their family as well. They were large families. William Henry Harrison had 10 children altogether. John Scott Harrison actually had 13 children, three with his first wife, and then 10 with his second wife. And Benjamin Harrison is with his second wife and is the second son in that group. So it's a large family. So that our other family members, of course, they're at the cemetery. And that's one of the things that comes into play with this particular story with the Harrison horror, as it was often known. And if I can, I will try to share my screen here. I'm going to pull up an image real quick here. We have a little booklet that was put together for this, and let's see if I can share this. So here is the front cover of the Harrison Horror, which is a little booklet that was put together by Harry Sievers, who is Benjamin Harrison's biographer. And this was actually printed in 1956, but talking about the incident. And one of the things that you discover by reading this little book is that the Harrison family, when they were at John Scott Harrison's funeral at the cemetery, they noticed that one of the other graves has been disturbed. And this other grave is actually Augustus Devlin, who is a relative of sorts of the Harrisons. Actually, John Scott Harrison's sister married into the Devlin family, so it's his brother-in-law's side of the family. Often you'll see the term cousin used if you're reading into the materials. So he was not exactly a cousin of Benjamin Harrison, but he is a connected family to the Harrison family there as well. So this is a very interesting little booklet that goes into all of these details of them being at John Scott Harrison's funeral, noticing that the other relative's grave has been disturbed. So within 24 hours, they are looking for the other relative, for Mr. Devlin's body. So it is within that 24-hour window that Benjamin Harrison actually comes back to Indianapolis. He was preparing to give a speech with the Republican Party, so he had taken the train back home. But one of his brothers and his nephew were in Cincinnati area, North Bend area, and they actually started looking for their cousin, the other relative, Devlin's body at that time. And that then, and while they're looking for this other relative's remains, they discover John Scott Harrison's remains by accident. Didn't know at the time that his grave had been robbed, actually.
Now, the way I'd heard the story is like the brother, or what, Benjamin Harrison's brother was one that was leading this charge, wasn't he? Or trying to.
Yeah, so is John, his name is also John, so another John Harrison, John Harrison Jr. So is him and uh, his nephew by the last name of Eaton. The two of them were on this mission to go find the other relative's body, find the remains. So within 24 hours, they're actually at the Ohio Medical School in Cincinnati, asking questions, looking for the remains there. And quite by accident, discover John Scott Harrison. They had a kind of a pulley system. Apparently, there's a little drawing actually in the book where there was a area that the body snatchers could sort of slide a body into, and then there was a hook, and they would grapple them up through this chamber closer to that. Kind of reminds me of like a dumbwaiter kind of system. And it was when they opened these doors and found that there's this gentleman there. They're hardly recognized him. He had a long beard. Their father had a long beard, and they had shaved his beard. So they were quite surprised, and a little hard to recognize someone when you're used to seeing this very long beard for many years. To discover his body, in this chamber where they could raise the bodies up into the medical school. And so they also immediately start searching. They are in like a third floor, kind of, I think, attic area, and find his clothing that had been folded and saved, and they recognized and identified this as well. So Benjamin Harrison again had come home. He actually gets the news there are relatives that are in North Bend. They're just a few miles between Cincinnati and North Bend, but if you think of travel in the 1870s, but a few of the other relatives in North Bend had actually gone back to the cemetery the next day and discovered that John Scott Harrison's gravesite had been disturbed as well. And because they had taken the precautions with the stones and the cement and all of that, and they had even, there was one kind of glass layer of the coffin that had been sealed They had sort of dug down at an angle, broken the glass, and apparently pulled him out by his feet, is the description that they give in the account at that time period. So even though they knew precautions had kind of been made with these other layers on top, they kind of went under those and were able to steal the body at that time anyway.
It sounds like they had inside information on how it was.
It kind of does, doesn't it? Which is why Benjamin Harrison then wasn't sure. You know, he had hired the gentleman to watch the grave site. And, you know, did he neglect his duties? Did he fall asleep? Was he in on it? Those were all questions, of course, that Benjamin Harrison, as a lawyer in particular, was asking, you know, hey, how did this happen? You were supposed to be guarding this for us. So Benjamin Harrison, pretty quickly then on this discovery and getting the communications from his relatives, a telegram from his brother, hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which is famous, of course, from that time period. So connected to the Chicago office of the Pinkertons and actually hired them to investigate the body snatching.
I understand that they found the cousin first, like in a vat, floating in a vat or whatever, and then they found their father. Is that correct? Or
The other relative actually had been shipped up to Ann Arbor, Michigan.
oh,
Um, so there were kind of three medical schools involved. It was the Ohio Medical College, the Miami Medical College, and Ann Arbor, you know, so they're associated with the college or schools there. And his cousin, other relative, had been passed away on May 18th. John Scott Harrison passed away then on May 25th. So again, just about a week apart from each other. But they had actually shipped his body up to the Ann Arbor Medical School. But they were able to, you know, talk to, there was a janitor at the medical school. They learned about that they were shipping bodies other places. So they were able to find him and bring him back as well.
so when they've been able to, when they were did this, I know this was a major problem back at the time because of the need that uh, the medical schools were, coveting these cadavers. What happened? I mean, when you got that connected of a family, you wouldn't think they would be subject to that. What happened from there? You would imagine there were probably some heavy hammers coming down.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, Benjamin Harrison was not happy. I think there are newspaper accounts of, you know, he got back on the train, went back down to Cincinnati, is there, you know, with the other relatives then at the medical college, asking these questions, talking to the doctors, the professors there. They particularly talked to a janitor there, reluctant janitor, I'll say. And, you know, it's whether did the doctors and the administration know, was the janitor doing this? You know, they thought, is he getting it from more legitimate sources? How are we getting these bodies? But so it's interesting. Of course, Benjamin Harrison being a lawyer, they did go to trial. Again, he gets the Pinkerton report back, and I can share my screen here again. Let me pull up the Pinkerton report here for a second, if I can, just to show that to you. But it's interesting. Because they did go to trial, but in the end, it's kind of lost to time. Um, so we don't know. I mean, I almost feel like, you know, did they settle out of court, so to speak? Because they bring charges against the janitor, they bring charges against the gentleman who Benjamin Harrison hired to guard the gravesite. But unfortunately, appears, unless someone can dig into those court trial records a little bit more, maybe find something, but from the booklet from Sievers in the 1950s and other information we have, it's not quite clear what happened in those cases. We do know that different laws were passed that kind of helped curtail this as a thing, as a business thing. But so this is the front page of the Pinkerton report. So of course, Alan Pinkerton. And so it says, on May 30th, he received a telegram from Benjamin Harrison, and he has the copy of what the telegram said there, that the body of the Honorable John Scott Harrison, his father, was stolen from the grave in North Bend last night. And they have done a most diligent search and found all of the things, the clothing and the different things they found there, and that he's going back to Cincinnati to the Grand Hotel and tomorrow, and would like, one of the Pinkerton agents to send a detective to meet him there as well. So we have, I think it's about a 12-page report from the Pinkertons. Again, they did question the guard, questioning other people at the medical schools and whatnot too. So all of this came to evidence in the trial, apparently. But in 1880, they did pass a different law in Ohio, again, with this all taking place in Ohio, that made the punishment for body snatching more severe. Was one of the parts of the 1880 law that passed that really helped. And also then, as time goes on, more and more people are hearing about these things. Really, I think this particular case, again, having that connection to William Henry Harrison, and this is the son of a president whose body has been snatched. It did make the headlines, not only in Cincinnati and Indianapolis, but in, across the East Coast. So it really brought a light to this problem and issue that the grave snatchers, the robbers, were causing at this time.
So the law was changed, what, a couple years later, you said?
Yeah,
Or
1880. Yeah, 1880 is when it was Ohio law. I think it depends on the state. There are different laws that are passed, but this particular one that they talk about from this case in Ohio was in 1880, when they kind of beefed up their standards of what they could do for body snatching at that time.
it would seem like going after the medical schools would have probably been a pretty good start, because they were the ones who were funding it. So
Right. Yeah, and it's
so
interesting
go
because, of
ahead.
course, the Harrison family and Caroline's family have other connections to, colleges and universities in the area, not necessarily the medical schools, but there are some other family members that have the connections. So it is interesting how that kind of plays out.
Yeah, you mess with the wrong family, right?
All right.
Yeah. So yeah, because like, wasn't Carolyn's father like, didn't he run a women's college in Ohio? Or
And that's kind of how Benjamin Harrison and Caroline met. Her father, his name is John Witherspoon Scott. So it gets a little confusing with the names of the family when we have John Scott Harrison and John Scott, also being Caroline's father. But he was a professor at several different colleges through the years, but was at Miami University. And then he was the first principal of the Oxford Female Institute there in Oxford, Ohio, where Caroline Harrison went to school as well. Her family goes back kind of into the Pennsylvania lines. Just as a complete random fact and side note, she has relatives that go back to Benjamin Rush, was a doctor, signed
right,
the Declaration of Independence.
right.
And as ironically, William Henry Harrison actually studied medicine under Dr. Rush. His father wanted him to go into the medical profession. And Benjamin Harrison V passed away. William Henry wasn't so keen on becoming a doctor. And William Henry, of course, came west and is in Cincinnati at that time. So it's funny how all of those things kind of intertwine and connect through the years.
Yeah, very much so. That's very cool. So what like I said, this whole thing came out. It had to be like a big, I mean, the son of a president, that had to be like a pretty big national news. I mean, I don't know if it quite ever made the Lindbergh baby thing, but it had to be a pretty big
Right.
event.
Yeah, and it did get to the press. I think there's a little account that a reporter kind of caught wind of some activity, wondered what was going on. Apparently, there was a fire department next to the medical school there in Cincinnati, and he just started talking to them and learned what was happening fairly quickly on. So it was, hitting those newspapers of the day fairly quickly that this had happened.
Well, very good. So what did it? I mean, what kind of impact did it have on the Harrison family that you know of, other than them? You know, the event of itself. Did it carry on any echoes or?
Well, I think that the threat of body snatching, sort of went away as time went on, of course, but immediate impact, of course, was the shock for the family members who found John Scott Harrison's body. When they went to the legal court for their cousin Devlin, his mother was a widow, so they actually tried, to sue the three different medical colleges that were involved for, like pain and suffering. The shock that this poor woman had to go through, thinking, where her son's body had been stolen and what might have happened with it. Also, Benjamin Harrison, made the same claim for his father. And then the shock of finding them, for his brother, finding it, the body there like that was quite shocking. And just all of the ins and outs then the family is dealing with reinterring the bodies. Devlin's body had to be brought back down from Ann Arbor, Michigan. John Scott Harrison, they actually ended up interring him in William Henry Harrison's tomb rather than in the cemetery. And for a while did not put sort of like the nameplate. It's, again, it's more of a tomb there. Didn't have a nameplate up for John Scott Harrison for a little bit. And there are a couple of other relatives that are in there as well. So they thought it was a little more secure in the tomb. It has, a gate and whatnot. Although, it's more secure today than it was in 1878. But, they felt that was something they had to do rather than putting him back over in the family cemetery. So all of those different things through the years, I mean, it was quite a shock to Harrison. And he was horrified to find that something this indignant had happened, to his father.
Yeah, I would think that I would think that the motivation would have gone down. They probably were not nearly as much danger in the reinterment because they weren't fresh, for the medical schools, where the money was, right? But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and
but
it's just
I would imagine you'd be quite distressed and freaked out over the whole process as
yeah.
well. But
Well, and it is just kind of amazing to think that, here they noticed that the other relatives had been disturbed, and within 24 hours, they're finding that their father's grave had also been robbed and his body stolen. So yeah, it happened very quickly in that 24-hour period. So you can imagine, here you've just gone through the funeral, and obviously other family members have passed away not that long ago. So all of that adding to the dismay that the family had over what had happened.
yeah, that sounds quite hard to deal with, And you would, like I said, you would think that the last people they'd be going after is someone that's that high profile, but but that didn't seem to make much difference.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned the vat, and Devlin's body was found in a vat of brine, but it was at the Michigan Medical School. But yeah, to thinking then of, having to transport his body back and reinterring him and all of that too. So um, yeah, it's just amazing that, they were that quick and that quick in moving him to Ann Arbor, Michigan, even too.
Now this was what, 1878, you said?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. From what I understand of the history of the body snatchers and the resurrectionists or what have you, was that the business stemmed from the medical industry learning how much they learned during the Civil War when the surgeons were doing so many surgeries every day that they realized that they needed that cadaver to work from, and that's really where this started coming from. Is that the way I understood it?
Yes, and it's they have the horror of the Civil War and the surgeons, having to perform different, um, amputations and different things during the Civil War. But it's interesting when you look at kind of that history of the medical history and the medical schools and how they were teaching. And obviously today there are other ways, models and whatnot that can be made that wasn't something you could do in the 1700s or the early 1800s. So you have different things happening, and like in the United Kingdom as well. There's an act in 1832 actually that gives legal ways for them to get corpses in the United Kingdom. That's a little later to come here to the United States. Again, those iron coffins became frequent. Besides the fear of having bodies stolen, you also have some of the fear of being buried alive. So I think it's interesting to look at those. Here they have iron coffins, but they also had, the bells and the different ways if you were not deceased and accidentally buried. So I don't know how they weighed those two differences in there, because you would have a sort of different ways of the coffins at that time. But
That's where the term "dead ringer" came from, isn't it?
right,
Yeah.
right. So it's kind of interesting to look at all of that history as well. But it isn't till later that you really start having these uniform rules and regulations and ways that people can donate to medical schools, and all of that kind of thing too. So it really does take some time. And in the US, it was kind of state by state. So again, you would have different rules and regulations that might be passed depending on the state that you were in. But it really isn't until the 20th century that you start to have ways for medical schools to receive cadavers in a more legitimate manner, really.
When did now I know that there, a lot of times people, you'll see on social media, people freak out when they see these mortis safes over the top of a grave because they have no idea why it's there, but it's there for these reasons because keeping people from digging it up. The mortar safes are those big steel or iron cages that they put over the top of them. So
Yeah, and again, you have different levels of, if it's a mausoleum and how things are locked or secured, and different ways that they would do that as well. But and again, the Harrisons making that choice with John Scott Harrison to move him over to his father's tomb to be hopefully a little more secure at the time.
well, very good. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Benjamin Harrison House for people that may not have visited that place?
Well, and I will. So we are the home of Benjamin Harrison, and it is the only house still standing that he actually lived in here in Indianapolis. So again, we have a lot of items that actually belong to the Harrison family. Tie into kind of our conversation tonight, we have two exhibits that are changing exhibits. Right now, we have an exhibit out in the Welcome Center that is Life in the White House. And up on the third floor, how it ties in kind of with our topic this evening is we have Death in the White House. Besides the Harrison horror and the body snatching of his father, there were several other sort of tragic things with the Harrisons in the White House. Of course, William Henry Harrison, who we touched upon a little bit here this evening, he is actually the first president to die in the White House. In 1841. Of course, he gave a very long speech and has the longest speech but the shortest term of any president ever. A little more tidbits on his passing. He was first interred in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Because and would have been in the month of March at that time, so they waited a few months to bring his body to North Bend, Ohio, to the site there. And of course, there's the larger obelisk that was added in the 1920s there with William Henry Harrison. So first president to die in office. Unfortunately, Caroline Harrison is the second first lady to die during an administration of, the president as well. So there were 3 first ladies and 8 presidents that have died in office. So our exhibit up on the 3rd floor takes a little bit closer look at those, and also looks at a few other tragic events in Harrison's administration. 2 of his cabinet members unfortunately had sort of tragic ends. So it's that death in the White House. One of the things we more recently received is a copy of a diary that was kept by Josephine Knipe, who worked for the Harrisons. She was actually in the room when Caroline Harrison passed away. So we had that firsthand account and her relating different things during Caroline's illness. So that's all new to this exhibit. But we have those 2 changing exhibit areas that rotate from year to year. But otherwise, it is the 10 rooms in the house with the historic furnishings and wallpapers that we've recently redone, and all of those wonderful things that actually belong to the Harrison family that you can come see, learn about his presidency, learn about their life in the White House, learn about his family, his children, grandchildren, and all of the different things that happened here in the house, and Harrison's accomplishments, which are often, I'll say, not as prevalent as some presidents. So you have all of those different things you can come learn about Benjamin Harrison and his family here.
Well, we're going to talk about Caroline in December as well, but her father also died in the White House, did he not? And she was caring for him at the time. So
Yeah, he actually passed away a month after she did. So it lived to be quite elderly, and yes, died in the White House as well.
well, and that's one of the things I'm really excited about our December issue. Okay, that we're going to be doing. We have in November. I've got a friend of mine that's a historian talking about a Hoosier that was in Andersonville POW camp, which is a horrific story. But he's going to be talking about that. But in December, you're going to be back, and you're going to be talking about Caroline Harrison, which I guarantee you Hoosiers don't know anything about this woman, but she was a first lady of first, was she not?
She was. So,
As a tease, So yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're doing it in December because she's the first one to bring a Christmas tree into the White House. So that's my tie-in for December. But that is just a little piece of all the things that she accomplished in just that short time. So
Right.
so I'm very excited about that one as well, because people don't realize what a rock star she was. She probably accomplished more than almost any other first lady in her time in there. And when you consider the first that she had accomplished.
Yeah, there's really a lot, again, that is not often thought about with Caroline Harrison. So I'm looking forward to talking about all of her first in December.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Well, is I think we've scared everybody for October. so so everybody's going to be making sure we put steel down over the grave sites and stuff. So, but fortunately, we don't have to deal with that as much as they did back then. But so thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. I seriously appreciate this.
You are welcome. Thank you for having us.
And if you have not been down to the Benjamin Harrison presidential site, I recommend the trip. It's a lot of fun down there. So thank you much for sharing.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye bye.
Bye.